Okay, so before we begin our class, today is Rosh Chodesh Elul, first day of Rosh Chodesh. Elul is called Chodesh HaRachamim, the month where Hashem has absolute rachmanis, pity, mercy on his children. And looking back at the past year, where we as a nation have really, really, really gone through a lot, suffered, continuously suffering. I look back at last year's Rosh Hashanah and I think to myself, we didn't even know last year Rosh Hashanah what even to daven for. You know how you go through like the Avinu Malkeinu and like we ask Hashem, stop this gzeira and stop that crazy, illness. Or I remember like when COVID hit, I also thought, my gosh, like we didn't know that we had to ask Hashem stop a sickness, and now we didn't know that we had to ask Hashem stop a decree. So it's like, Emir Hashem, like it's not possible that Hashem does not have rachamim on his nation. Like this month, like we have a different perspective from last year's Chodesh Elul. Last year's Chodesh Elul, we just like, waltzed into Chodesh Elul very, nonchalantly in a way. And I'm not saying really nonchalantly because everybody wants to connect with Hashem and do tshuva on his or her level, but nonchalantly meaning we were oblivious. We were oblivious of what was to come. And now we're not oblivious. We're not oblivious. So we really, really, really have to like take advantage of this month and on a personal level, because we know that Hashem is definitely like bringing Mashiach like any second now. Like that's without a doubt. And one of the things that the Rebbe talks about to bring Mashiach is to actually, you know, cause like a geula on a personal level as well. And that means each person, that parable of like, the little boy that was throwing the fish back into the sea, and the father said, what do you like, what difference does it make? There's so many millions. And he's like, I'm making a difference to this one. And each one of us in our own personal lives, like to show up just more connected with Hashem, more conscious of what we're doing, how we're approaching our relationships, how we're showing up to others, how we are, the stories that we tell ourselves in our minds, really. Like that's going to be the power of this month. And hopefully we're all going to spend Rosh Hashanah together with our loved ones in Yerushalayim, all the hostages free. Imagine, the story that we're telling ourselves in the mind is like, oh my gosh, all these hostages and they're with Hamas and Hamas is not letting them out, and Hamas is threatening to kill them, and they killed them already. And it's such a fear-based place of being. And the other side is also truth. Things are not as they appear to be. The other side of thinking is like, Mashiach is coming. Hashem is taking care of everybody. Hashem is taking care of Sina, your children and grandchildren and Eretz Yisrael and all our loved ones all over the world. Hashem is taking care of me, little me. Hashem is looking at me and being involved in my life. So I just want to wish all of you a beautiful Chodesh, such a powerful month. We could just take from the energy of every single day. I'm sure you're all familiar with the custom to add in 3 extra chapters of Tehillim on a daily basis, starting from tomorrow, and also the daily psalm of saying L'David Hashem Oiri. So we have a lot of like tools to help us along the way, because we do know, and we're going to get to the Tanya in a second, we do know that this is the month when the king is in the field. Hashem is very accessible to us. But there's just one little caveat. There's one little disclaimer over here. The king goes into the field, but if we remain in our homes, we don't meet the king. So we have to symbolically leave our homes and go out to greet the king. And when we leave our comfort zone, our cozy little comfort zone where we're all nice and comfortable, and we're even comfortable with gullus, we're even comfortable with discomfort. Discomfort, you can get used to anything. Like we're even comfortable with our own way of being because we're scared of what's on the other side. What we have to do is we have to take that first step, and then Hashem is there for us to access, like completely in the field, and so much help and rachamim. This is the chodesh of rachamim. That's what I was going to say before Chaisar suggested I recorded it. Okay. So Okay, chapter 12 of Shaar Hayichud v'Emunah, the last chapter. So we're actually making a siyum today of this part of Tanya, the last chapter in the series of faith, right? And it's actually a very interesting way that the Alter Rebbe finishes off this book of Tanya, this part of Tanya. We were discussing in last chapter how the process of emotions become letters, which become thoughts, speech, and action, right? But now we're also applying this to Hashem. So we mentioned a little bit in last chapter as well that Hashem created the world with letters, right? Now, usually letters are a lower level than intelligence. So in a human being, we first have our intelligence, our capacity to understand, because if we don't have a capacity to understand, well, then we're not human beings, right? But we have a capacity to understand, we have emotions, and those emotions don't really need letters or words to be described. We can tell an emotion without translating it into letters and words. But once they start developing within us, they do take on a description. And they do take on a description of which is composed of letters, which becomes words, which then become either speech or directly to action, or first speech and then action. But nonetheless, these letters and words in a human being are lower than his original intelligence. It's a lower level. It's a dilution of his intelligence. But Hashem created the world as well with 10 pronouncements, 10 statements. And those 10 statements are made up of words, which are made up of letters, right? So we could make the mistake, and this we said last chapter as well, we could make the mistake to think that the letters of Hashem are lower than perhaps our intelligence, but it's not so. The letters, usually letters are lower than intelligence, but these 22 letters come directly from Hashem's emotional attributes, and they create our intelligence. It's what comes before our creation. And our creation includes our intelligence, our emotions, etc. So in other words, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are actually 22 channels or a flow of creation of energy from Hashem. Now, here's the question that the Alter Rebbe deals with in this chapter. If there are only 22 channels of creation, how did we end up with a world that has millions and billions and trillions of creations? We haven't even grasped in our little corner of the universe. We don't even know what Hashem created. There could be particles of dust and snowflakes and creatures under the sea, and there's millions and trillions of creations in this world. How did they all come? From merely 22 flows of energy, 22 channels of creation. So, the Alter Rebbe deals with this in this chapter. It's an interesting technical chapter. And what's interesting about this is that the Rebbe actually gives a commentary on this chapter saying that usually what the Alter Rebbe deals with in this chapter is usually a subject for more like esoteric books of Kabbalah. Like when you want to know exactly the details of why and what and where and when, and it's not usual for Tanya. It's not a usual kind of a chapter for Tanya. Nonetheless, the Alter Rebbe does include it here, obviously not in its full detail, for us to remember what he originally started Shaar Hayichud v'Emunah with, how every creation comes from Hashem, and that Hashem is constantly creating and maintaining the existence of each and every single one of us and each and every single creation in this world. So created beings are different from one another, and again, there are millions and trillions and zillions of them. They're different from one another in two ways. They're different from one another in a general way, because they belong to one of four categories, which is doimem, tzomeach, chai, medaber. Doimem is the mineral world, tzomeach is the plant world, vegetable world, vegetation. Chai is the animal world, and Medaber is the human being. So each creation falls generally into one of these categories. That is one way that creations are different from one another. And then they are also different from one another specifically because there are different types of creation within those categories. So you could have blue eyes or green eyes or a long nose or a short nose or whatever. They're all different kinds of insects and animals and plants and flowers. They're all different kinds of specificity in the categories of creation. So how does this actually work? Why is this so? This is actually it all originates with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's because of the different arrangements and formulas and permutations of those letters. The most common ones which we are actually familiar with are either substitutions or numerical values of letters. So gematria is something, numerical value is something that we're all very familiar with. But there's also other ways that people who are more knowledgeable are able to substitute one letter for another letter because they originate or they use the same tools or faculties in the mouth to pronounce, for example. There are all different kinds of letters and formulas to change the letters, right? But there are also lots and lots of formulas and substitutions and permutations of these letters that we regular people are not familiar with that are written in the deeper books of Kabbalah. But what we do know is that all the letters are interchangeable via these different formulas. And not only the words, but each letter of the Hebrew alphabet is a channel for creation. So it's not only that's why we keep on saying that thoughts and emotions become letters. We don't say emotions become words, they become letters because a word is made up of a few letters. And each of those letters is a channel for creation. And then when it becomes a word, it's very interesting. The Alter Rebbe explains to us here how these letters create. When it becomes a word, in addition to each letter's individual energy, because each letter has an individual channel of creation, there becomes a general life force which becomes greater than the sum total of the letters is formed. This general life force is formed. In other words, the word, when it joins all the letters, it creates a greater energy than the sum total of its parts. So, and then what happens with the letters? The individual energy of the letters submit to this higher energy because the higher energy is what enables the letters to join together. And then it creates. So the creation which comes from this word gets an energy from each letter and from the word itself. So each letter gives to the creation the specific details of the creation, and the word itself gives the general energy of the creation, which is all interesting and pretty technical, actually, right? So, and the Alter Rebbe also adds, interestingly, in this chapter, like a note to make us aware that the shape and forms of the Hebrew letters also have meaning. Because in the same way that each letter represents a separate flow of energy, not found in any other letter, each letter is also written in a different shape and form, and it's explained in Kabbalah. And all of this, the letters, the forms, the shapes, they all represent energy which comes from the midos, the emotional attributes of Hashem. Now, what's very interesting is that the Alter Rebbe brings over here an example of a statement, right? Because the 10 statements of creation, we find them in the Torah. The original 10 pronouncements are written in the Torah when we read about the creation of the world. And then they're substituted and formulated differently in order to create all the other beings in this world, right? And by the way, not just in this world. Creation is not only in this world. Creation is also in the spiritual worlds, the worlds we don't see, the angels, the celestial beings, etc. And now, the Alter Rebbe actually gives an interesting example of this. So we know simply, right, that Hashem said, Yehi Rakia, let there be a firmament, right? Firmament is the fancy word of saying heaven, right? Now, sometimes one statement can be the source of many creations. So when Hashem said, Yehi Rakia, and this is just one example that the Alter Rebbe brings to give us to enable us to understand that just as this happens in this instance, it happens in many other instances as well. So Yehi Rakia didn't just create the blue sky that's above us that we see, but Yehi Rakia, the statement Yehi Rakia, created the 7 heavens and its hosts, their hosts. Now, interestingly enough, it's the Chabad custom to, for example, when a couple gets married, to have the chuppah underneath the skies. And that is to access all these 7 heavens which come above us, one after the other after the other. We just see, the pretty blue sky with the clouds, but there's really a lot above that, and they're hosts. So what does it mean they're hosts? So first of all, there are different levels of heaven. And the Alter Rebbe gives 3 examples. He doesn't go into all 7, but he gives 3 examples. One example is there's one heaven that's called Shchakim. And in that heaven, that is the source for the food of tzaddikim. Now that might be spiritual food, it might be physical food, but it's what we refer to as lechem min hashamayim, right? When we make a bracha on bread that we eat, we say hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. We bless Hashem for bringing bread out of the earth, right? But there's actually a level of lechem min hashamayim, which could refer to our sustenance, which could refer to, over here it's being referred to, the food of tzaddikim. Then there is a level of heaven called Zvul. Zvul is the source of Yerushalayim, the source of creation of Yerushalayim, and not only the physical Yerushalayim down here below, but something that we refer to as Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the superior Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim that's in the spiritual worlds. It is also the source of the Mizbeach, the altar, and the actual Beis HaMikdash. Then there is another example, as the Alter Rebbe brings, of a level of heaven called Machon. These are all Kabbalistic names and terms. And this is where rain and hail develop. So rain is really a very essential need of ours, and this is where it comes from. And these are the 3 examples that the Alter Rebbe gives us to enable us to understand that when Hashem said Yehi Rakia, without even substituting and formulating and etc., there's a million different creations that resulted out of one simple statement. So it's the 7 Rakiyas with all the different creations inside of it and the source for everything. Now, all of these heavens, right, receive their life from the common statement, Yehi Rakia. But then the individual details and creations come from a rearrangement of these words or substitutions of these words, depending on the level of the actual creation. So really, when we say that the words and letters are rearranged, the words and letters being rearranged really means that it's a rearrangement of energy of Hashem, which flows. It's a different energy of Hashem. And this is something very interesting that the Alter Rebbe says, that in every word, the first letter is the most dominant energy. And the other letters are secondary, which helps us to understand what the importance is, or what the significance is, of something called Rashi Tevot. Rashi Tevot, when we say, and it's actually in English, it's called an acronym, right? So Rashi Tevot, we sometimes we write like Beis Yud for Bnei Israel, right? Or Beis Samach Daled for Bisyata Deshmaya. We have this custom to write acronyms, right? And the reason is because the first letter of every word is the most dominant. Now, before I actually go into how the Alter Rebbe actually ends off this chapter, I just want to like give a parenthesis over here and refer to ourselves, right? Because we each have a name as well. And our name, our Hebrew name, is actually the source of our energy. It's the source of our godly energy in this world. So when our parents had Ruach HaKodesh and named us something, or if we didn't get a name of birth and we were given a name later on, that name is really our spiritual energy. And it's also because it's also the reason why, chas v'shalom, if a person is not well, we actually add a name or we change the name to be able to rearrange the spiritual energy coming down to that person, which is also pretty interesting. Now the Alter Rebbe ends off saying something very interesting. The individual formulations of each creation, of which there are millions and trillions and zillions, we don't know how many creations there actually are, right? He says don't think that it's not from Hashem. It's like so diluted and it's just very far, right? They're actually like the light of the moon, which actually the light of the moon reflects the light of the sun. But the light of the moon gets its light from the sun. In this situation, the light at night is a light from a light. Therefore, it has undergone a transformation. It's not merely a mirror. So when we actually say the moon reflects the sun, it's actually incorrect. It's that the moon receives the light from the sun and then is transformed. In other words, the original light of the moon doesn't exist anymore. But it's not merely a mirror to reflect the light of the sun. The light of the sun is absorbed by the moon, and then the moon changes and has this new light that illuminates the evening, right? So what happens? In the same way, the letters of each creation and each substitution, each formula, each permutation, etc., they represent Hashem's flow of energy directly from his emotional attributes, directly from his midos, and his ability to create the world from nothing, and continues to give existence, not merely reflecting the light of Hashem, but actually becoming a new source, a new channel of light from Hashem. So from this original, strong expression of energy, Hashem creates and derives levels of light similar, but changed from the original light, just like the sun and the moon. The light of the moon is similar to the sun, but very changed. I mean, it's very diminished as well. That's why it's dark at night, right? And thereby, the original formula, the original channel of energy changes and transforms itself until it creates the individual creations of this world and the spiritual worlds. Hashem descends level after level, decreasing the energy revealed to us, resulting not only in a higher level of creation, and who belongs to the higher level creation, which categories belong to the higher level creation, the categories of Tzomeach, Chai, and Medaber, which is the vegetable world, the plant world, animal world, and the human being. That's called the higher level of creation. The reason why it's called a higher level of creation because its growth is apparent. A plant grows, an animal lives and breathes. And of course, a human being even speaks and has human intelligence. But let's not make a mistake. The Alter Rebbe ends off this chapter by saying, not only does the energy of Hashem create the higher levels of creation, but also the lower level of creation, which is included in the category of doimim, which is the mineral world, which includes stones and dirt. And the Alter Rebbe uses the two words, which is even and afar. Now, we don't really see the words even and afar in the original 10 pronouncements with which Hashem created the world, but even even, a stone which appears to have no life whatsoever and is just, a stone, doesn't grow, doesn't change. It apparently has no vitality, although we know that lots of stones have lots of vitality, by the way, but it doesn't appear to have that. And afar, dust, you sweep the floor in your kitchen and lots of dust comes up, even dust of the earth, which is afar. All that the name implies that it's been changed and formatted from the original 10 statements which created all creation. And that is how the Alter Rebbe actually ends off this chapter. Any questions, observations? You can unmute yourself. We're not going to make the mistake of ending the recording this time. So be brave if you have anything to say.
I was struck with something when you were talking about the energy of words. And yesterday I watched a Rebbe video with my grandchildren, which I haven't seen for 20 something years, let's say. And it just struck me of how important the words we use, like even if you use, like they were talking about, like, don't say bad, say not good, that what that creation, what that energy is. And when you use like not good words, curse words or whatever, just how incredible that energy is. It's not just a simple little word. It's just, that's just kept going through my head when you were talking.
So I love that you brought that up, Haisara, because there's actually a sikha, a very famous sikha of the Rebbe, and it has nothing to do with the creation of the world per se, but what we can create, right? And we know that we are partners in creation, right? And there's this amazing sikha about the power of words that the Rebbe turns the whole thing on its head, as is the Rebbe's usual, custom, that we know, for example, that our words have power. They really do have power. And the Rebbe cites the example in halacha, actually, that when a person speaks ill of somebody else, right? If you speak lashon hara, it affects three people. It affects the person who's speaking, it affects the person who's listening, and it affects the person about whom we are speaking. And then the Rebbe asks the question, well, one second, why should it affect the person about whom we're speaking? That person may not even be present. Well, he's probably not present. And why is it his fault that you're speaking bad about him, right? But the Rebbe actually turns, and obviously we don't have time to go into all the details, but the Alter Rebbe actually turns the whole thing on its head by saying the opposite is true as well. By speaking good about somebody, by speaking well of a situation, by speaking to ourselves in a positive way as well, we also have an effect on the reality. So the example that the Rebbe brings in that sikha is about judging others favorably, right? So we usually look at the commandment, dan l'kol adam l'kaf zchus, to judge each person favorably, which is, by the way, a great thing to do in Chodesh Elul. We want Hashem to judge us favorably, and so therefore we say that we are, Hashem tzil, Hashem is our shadow, so we should also judge others favorably. But how do we actually do that? Because the traditional meaning, the traditional explanation of that statement is we kind of justify a person's behavior, and we say to the and we say, well, you know why a person is behaving so badly? Because his circumstances are not right, or his circumstances are not good. You know, you sort of develop a compassion for a person, and you say, well, he's behaving like this because of extenuating circumstances. But the Rebbe actually says we can make it even so much more powerful, and we can notice that when a person behaves inappropriately, the compassion that we have for him is actually not based on external circumstances or extenuating circumstances, but what we can say and therefore give that person a lot of power is that since this person sinned, right, so badly, that must mean that he has a very lofty soul, because a lofty soul will have greater challenges. And since this person has greater challenges, he must have the power to overcome them. And he must have this lofty neshama that's going to help him overcome his problems and return to Hashem. And those are the words that we can use instead of speaking Lashon Hara. So most people, like you even introduced it and you said, oh, the power of our words, instead of saying bad, say not good. I know that video also. My kids also watched it. But in actual fact, we can even make it better. We don't even have to say not good. We can say, wow, this person has such a challenge. Like, they obviously have such immense capabilities and koiches and such an immense neshama that they are going to be able to use and overcome. And in the same way as you affect a person by speaking badly, even when they're not in front of you, you affect a person by speaking good of that person, even when they're not in front of you. We can affect our family members, our children, by thinking, by visualizing, by speaking it out loud. Words really have power. Letters, thoughts. It's very powerful. So thank you for bringing that up.
Not only thank you, but you just blew me away in this little paragraph. I mean, literally what you just said now is all of my work of Elul. I mean, all of my work.
Yeah.
Seriously. You just gave us in this little paragraph, this short, I'm blown away by what you just said.
It's not me, Sina. It's
No,
words of the Rebbe.
by what you just related to us, what the wisdom of the Rebbe. And I really am taking it to heart. I mean, that is exactly what I'm going to work on.
I think I mentioned this last week, but I am lately using the tool of how I speak to myself. I'm lately really gotten into doing it. Like, especially when I'm in a situation that I don't like, that I'm feeling desperate or frustrated, you really and truly can change. You can't change the situation, but you can change how you show up within that situation. And sometimes you can change the situation as well. But you ask yourself, what am I telling myself right now? What are the words that I'm speaking to myself? What is the story that I am telling myself? And it helps to write it down and then turn it on its head. What is the story I want to be telling myself? I don't want to be thinking this about this person. I want to be thinking something else about this person. I don't want to be thinking this about myself. I want to be thinking something else about myself. And write that down and then say it out loud. The same way as Hashem created the world with words and letters, our words and letters have so much power.
My mind is blown. My mind's blown too.
I love how like the last bit of the class always has these nuggets, right?
Exactly. Thank you for recording that, because I'm going to listen to it again and I'm going to ask other people to listen to it.
Okay,
Even
great.
not the whole class, just that part.
If you know how to edit a video, you could do that too, Sina. I have no idea how to do that.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Now next week very appropriately, next week we're going to start the next book in Tanya, which is called, guess what? Igeris Hatshuva. It's all about doing tshuva, which is this month. Now we're not going to finish that in Elul, but we're definitely starting it in Elul. Okay, so anybody has anything else to say? Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.